Hi, it's Katrina. From monuments with a tragic past to an abandoned theme park and creepy ghost towns, here are 10 incredible abandoned places. Number 10. Buzludzha. In the mountains of Bulgaria lies this abandoned building that looks almost like a spaceship landed out of the sky. Officially named the House Monument of the Bulgarian Communist Party, it was used for official parties and events until it closed in 1989, after the fall of the Soviet Union. While it may seem like this site is in the middle of nowhere, it was a historic strategic position for battle during the 1800s between the Bulgarians and the Turks. Its new design from the 1980s was meant to inspire and show off the might of the socialist movement. When it was closed down, it quickly fell victim to the elements, curious visitors, and graffiti artists. It's about 3 hours from Sofia by car, and there is no public transportation to the site. It is open to tourists on the outside, but inside is considered extremely dangerous and off-limits. But that hasn't stopped brave urban explorers from finding their way in. There are several ways to get in, although most involve a high drop into the dark, where it is usually wet and damp, so be prepared. Inside there is Soviet propaganda and ornate mosaics, litter, debris, graffiti, and a pretty eerie echo. Fully renovating the monument has been estimated around $19 million. So while everyone debates what to do with the monument, it continues to be affected by the elements. Number 9. The Ministers Treehouse. In the early 1990s, a landscaper named Horace Burgess purchased a tract of land in the woods of Tennessee. After one of the bigger trees on the property caught his eye, Burgess decided to create the world's largest treehouse in its branches. A few years into the project, Burgess ran out of lumber, and after turning to prayer for guidance, Burgess believed the Spirit of God said to him, "If you build me a treehouse, I'll never let you run out of material." After becoming an ordained minister, Burgess got back to work and continued building the treehouse, stating that he had a vision from God of how the construction should go. After spending 11 years crafting it, Burgess ended up with the largest treehouse in the world that spanned across the initial tree and 7 other trees on his property. He built the treehouse around the trees, which continued to grow through the floors and out of the windows. Stretching 100 feet into the sky, some believe the treehouse eventually measured around 10,000 square feet. Over the years, thousands of people showed up on his property to climb the structure, with Burgess continuing to work on it until 2004. Unfortunately, not everyone was respectful of the work Burgess put into it, with some posting graffiti and vandalizing the property. With winding stairs, dozens of rooms, a chapel, and a basketball hoop, the treehouse was a solid construction that needed an on-site security guard to protect the property. The Tennessee State Fire Marshal closed the treehouse down in 2012, saying that it was now a tourist attraction and needed to conform to state building codes. Later known as the Ministers Treehouse, fate intervened when a fire took hold of the building in 2019 and burned it to the ground within 15 minutes. This personal monument, pieced together from salvaged wood scraps and recycled metal, the sprawling building not only captured the imagination of its creator, but those who traveled to the Tennessee forest to see the treehouse inspired by God and one man's creative spirit. Number 8. Whistler Ghost Town. Once an old logging town on the edge of Green Lake, Parkhurst, located in Whistler, British Columbia, is a ghostly reminder of the past. Long before the legendary ski village existed on Canada's west coast, Parkhurst was a small town known for a few small houses used by workers from the local logging company. Named after the previous landowners, the small town was established around 1926, but not long after, when the Great Depression hit, the mill couldn't sell the logs that it was producing. After being purchased by another logging company, Parkhurst took on the name of Northern Mills and continued until a massive fire broke out in 1938, burning down the mill. Again, the mill bounced back and was completely rebuilt, with a school and shop introduced to the Parkhurst area soon after. Unfortunately, Parkhurst seemed to sustain another run of bad luck when the industry took a turn for the worse in the 1950s, and the mill was eventually abandoned in 1966. Because some of the old buildings still remain, visitors have taken to hiking the old loop of the town, now a faded reminder of what it used to be. Destroyed by heavy snow over the years, an abandoned car and a large house are just some of the remnants of this town, now decrepit and covered in graffiti. Set against the snowy mountains of Whistler, the remnants make for a stark reminder of the booming industry and how some areas that were once prosperous cannot sustain modern industries but still leave behind a ghostly imprint. Number 7. Yongma Land Theme Park. There's nothing creepier than an abandoned amusement park, and one in Seoul, Korea has become a popular destination for people seeking out the perfect selfie. Built in 1980, the family-oriented amusement park had a successful run, up until 2011 when attendance started to dwindle and the park had to shut down. Like many other abandoned places, rumors of hauntings abound, but it seems like the demise of the park was just a sign of the times. That didn't stop an enterprising businessman from trying to open the park again. And he did, but instead of sprucing up the place, he decided to leave the fading, rusting rides and amusements for visitors to see. If you're looking for the perfect dystopian backdrop, Yangma is the place to go. For $5, visitors can roam the old rides and see all the faded attractions, including roller coasters and a Viking ship, all in disarray. At 8 p.m., the owner of the facility turns the lights on for a ghostly merry-go-round and the perfect photo opportunity. Still creepy. Number 6. Live in Quarry. What do you do with traumatic and tragic historical locations? That's the question posed to people in the city of Krakow, where local officials plan to build on the former camp turned quarry. Established by a Jewish-owned enterprise to mine limestone in 1873, it was taken over in World War II and used as a forced labor camp. There are markers commemorating the loss of lives there, but it is now overgrown and abandoned. Over 800 Polish citizens were imprisoned there, with the site later becoming one of the sets in the 1993 film Schindler's List. Created using the original blueprints of the camp that resurrected the quarry a few hundred feet from the original location, inmates at the Plaszow camp worked limestone before disappearing. Overgrown with vegetation and now crumbling, the quarry is a half-hour walk from Krakow's Jewish district. A fence now surrounds the upper part of the quarry so no one falls in, and a cemetery is now erected there to remember the lives lost. With limestone cliffs, ponds, and dense vegetation, the rusting equipment and fence posts are surrounded by tangles of barbed wire. But even as nature tries to reclaim the land, the atrocities that occurred there should never be forgotten. Number 5. Lonakoning Silk Mill. When most buildings shut down for good, they are often repurposed at some point, but a silk mill in Laconing, Maryland still stands the same way it did when workers left for the last time 58 years ago. Only now it is in a decayed state of disrepair, one that serves as a time capsule to the past. In operation from 1907 to 1957, the mill processed silk imported from Japan and China, making silk thread and later rayon thread during World War II. In the 1920s, some 300 people worked there, but as antiquated machines became outdated, the number of workers dwindled. Even after shutting its doors, a number of abandoned belongings left behind by workers still remained. Dusty machines, discarded cigarette packs, and paperwork are just some of the items abandoned when the doors to the factory were closed shut. Herb Crawford, a Laconing resident all his life, has owned the silk mill for over 40 years, investing in the abandoned building because he believed business interests wanted to open a shirt factory. When that didn't happen, Crawford decided to open the building to photographers to come take photos of the time capsule in exchange for donations. Before that, officials from Preservation Maryland visited the mill with an interest in preserving it, but nothing materialized. Over the years, salvagers have shown interest in some of the contents, but Crawford has decided not to sell them and instead leaves what remains of the mill for photographers to capture. Now, with the roof falling in several places and the floor collapsing in some parts, no one knows just how long the historic mill will survive. For now, it seems the only way to get a glimpse into Maryland's past is through photos of this historic silk mill. Number 4. Canfranc International Railway Station. In a small village near the border between France and Spain, the Canfranc Railway Station sits with the Pyrenees as a backdrop. But instead of seeing a bustling population traveling across the country via train, the International Railway Station, built from 1921 to 1925, sits abandoned. When it opened, the Canfranc station was the biggest in Europe. In celebration of its high status, here was an inauguration ceremony that was attended by the King of Spain and the President of the French Republic. Built with elegance and style, there is a sense of grandeur at the luxurious station. But 8 years after it opened, the station and the tunnel were closed during the Spanish Civil War. After the war, the station later reopened with trouble getting back to normal until the outbreak of World War II. The station was used by both sides. In the beginning, it was a lifeline for Jews escaping through the railway, but the Germans later took control of the Art Nouveau station, flying the flag and using the station to transport stolen treasure such as gold and art. Later, war criminals used the same railway to escape the Allies. In the 1950s and 60s, the station finally returned to business as usual, but in 1970, after a huge steamer jumped the rails and crashed, the railway and station were shut down and the building, now abandoned, began to decay. In recent years, though, tours began visiting the station in hopes of capturing the perfect snapshot of how the decadence had turned to decay. You of course can go visit the historical station for yourself. If only it could talk, I'm sure it has lots of stories to tell. Number 3. Church of San Juan. In a small village in Mexico, only a single church remains after the lava from a local volcano buried the town. In 1943, the eruption of Volcán de Parkhurst began and continued for the next 8 years, burying the town but leaving the church unscathed. Luckily, no residents were injured during the eruption as the townspeople evacuated long before the lava reached the town. Every house and building in the village was buried under lava and volcanic rock, but somehow the small church withstood the lava flow as it overtook the area. Sadly, though, it was a slow decline as it took a year for the lava to reach and melt the rock of the cemetery walls that surround the small church. Eventually, the lava did flow over the graves, but it left the church tower and altar untouched. Located in the state of Michoacán, the church now sits in a barren landscape covered in mounds of volcanic ash. Many people believe it was a miracle the church was saved, or perhaps it was the solid slabs used as the church's foundation are what protected it from being completely destroyed. The original San Juan Parangari Cotiro Church stands in a solidified lava rock as a reminder of the power of nature. Number 2. Baghdad Turkish Restaurant Building. An abandoned building in downtown Baghdad ended up becoming the center of an uprising in early October 2019. The 6-story building, located near Tahrir Square and the area where the Iraqi government buildings and U.S. Embassy are located, was overtaken by protesters to keep snipers from moving in. Dubbed the Turkish Restaurant for an establishment that used to be on the top floor of the building, it had been empty for years before protesters decided to make it their headquarters. The dilapidated structure became home to hordes of young protesters who overtook the building and continued to carry food, water, and other supplies to activists who occupied the 14-story high structure. Bombed in 2003 during the invasion of Iraq, the building, although it was in an impressive state of disrepair, ended up becoming a headquarters for a new revolution in Iraq for those who wanted to rise up against the corrupt elite. Draped with banners that support the uprising and that call for the UN to intervene in the country, protesters have dubbed the building Uhud Mountain after an early battle in Islamic history. A number of floors below the protesters, pictures of many of the martyrs line the walls of the restaurant's former car park. With constant reminders everywhere of the danger to locals, fierce clashes continue as protesters push back against those they consider corrupt. The building and the protesters themselves are a stark depiction of the defiance and determination of those looking for justice in their country. Number 1. Kowloon Walled City. Once one of the most densely populated places on Earth, the Kowloon Walled City once measured only 1/100th of a square mile, but within it is believed to have once held up to 50,000 residents, making it 120 times more populated than New York City. Something of a city within a city, with interconnected high-rises that help to foster crime, the walled city began as a small fort that was built during the Song Dynasty. After sitting untouched for hundreds of years, it was later converted into a military outpost. During World War II, the area was occupied by Japanese forces who dismantled the defensive wall and used the materials to expand a nearby airport. After Japan surrendered in 1945, people began to move back into the walled city, including refugees and those attracted to the lack of laws there. With many of the squatters refugees from the Chinese Civil War, the British tried to drive them out, but after failing, they adopted a hands-off policy, which allowed health and safety regulations to fall to the wayside and food producers and businesses to conduct operations with a severe lack of rules. As people continued to flock to the area, they kept building on top of existing structures. The walled city ended up growing to 300 interconnected high-rise buildings, constructed room by room without the help of architects or with no strict building codes. So densely populated, light couldn't even reach the lower levels. With many dark alleys, one could travel from one side of the city to the other without touching the ground, instead using extensive corridors and rooftops to travel. Rooftops became the new utopia of the claustrophobic city, used for exercise, playgrounds, and as a way to get fresh air. With the authorities keeping their distance, brothels, opium dens, gambling parlors, and gangs took over. In the 70s, over 3,500 raids were conducted in the walled city, but both the British and Chinese governments were tired of the unending crime, and they gave $350 million in compensation to the residents and businesses to get them to leave. In 1993, the city was demolished and turned into Kowloon Walled City Park, a popular area for tourists and birdwatchers. Some things still remain, including the South Gate, once the main entrance to the tragic city. Thanks for watching! Have you ever visited any of these places? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you later. Bye!